Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Food Fight Show. My name is Nathan Harvey. I am your co-host for today. And today we've got a really great episode coming. We're going to talk all about civic hacking. What is it? How do you get involved? What can you do? What can you learn from it? So I'm really excited to do this. It's been a minute since we've had an episode, so I'm also really excited to get back to you and host another episode here. With me today, as usual, is my co-host, Nell Shamrell. Nell, how you doing?
Hey, Nathan, doing great. Greetings from currently cold and rainy Seattle, which anytime you talk to me until about May, that's probably what I'm going to say because that is Seattle, November through May. Great to be back doing the show with you and wonderful to be here.
Yeah, all right. And let's get to some of our panelists today. So, hi, Jill. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jill Hutchitel. I'm a co-founder and head of product at Ragtag, and I'm very excited to be here to talk about civic tech.
Awesome. And next up, we have Kirsten.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Lambertson. I'm a freelance product development manager, and I get most of my work through a place called Gigster. And I'm coming here because I'm been working with Jill at Ragtag. That's how I learned about today.
Awesome. And Kirsten, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I should have checked that before we got started.
I don't even hear it. I'm like the dog. If you say anything close to my name, I'll wag my tail and come.
That's awesome. As someone who has lived his whole life with a misspelled name, I can kind of relate. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All right. And we also have Chris today. Chris, hi.
Hey, my name's Chris Alfano. My normal home is Philadelphia, but I'm calling right now from Code for America World Headquarters in San Francisco. There's two threads that I think bring me here. One is I'm CTO of Jarvis Innovations, which is a company that brings operational automation and user-friendly workflows for organizations on the ground solving problems. And we do that on an open core philosophy and Habitat is a big part of that now. And the second thread is I founded a group called Code for Philly about 6 years ago, which is a local chapter of Code for America's National Brigade Network. We were one of the first dozen, and now there's over 80 around the country and we all organize local civic hacking. And I've handed off leadership of that a long time ago now and serve on Code for America's National Advisory Council for the whole Brigade Network.
That's awesome. So I think we should start off the episode very basic. Like, what is civic tech? What is civic hacking? Anyone care to take a swing at that?
I think it's a pretty broad term. And if you ask different people, you might get different answers. To me, when I think about civic tech or civic hacking, I think about people who are using technical skills in some way for social good. And there's a very, very wide range of things, whether it's helping nonprofits or local governments be more effective in what they're doing, whether it's helping support democratic processes, whether it's helping in disaster response, which certainly is a hot topic in California these days. So I think it covers all of those things.
Yeah, what is civic tech is the age-old food fight we have in Code for America. I'd point at kind of the two different ends of it. There's the ground up end, which is a lot of what we just heard about, kind of the ground up applications of hands-on creativity to the civic space, which at the local level includes government, nonprofits, community organizations. And that's kind of the ground up. And then from the top down, we have organizations like Code for America working at the federal level, at the state level, trying to change policies, trying to change how technology is done, trying to bring more folks from technology into government and public service to things like healthcare.gov, organizations like USDS and USDF and 18F at the federal level are the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that it's also interesting to me to see. It feels like there's been a lot more interest in civic tech lately, and I think that some of that has to do with the way that data is more and more accessible. And I feel like governments and other agencies are making a lot of their data accessible. You sort of marry that with open source tooling and people that care. And I think you get to some really good results.
Something I've found is, so I worked with the predecessor of Ragtag, Dev Progress, back in 2016. And we were building apps that some of which were used by the Hillary for America campaign. And I remember the one thing I could say was common to all the contributors on that was, I'm a person with technical skills. I care about where my government does and where my government is going. How can I help? I gave a talk called DevOps and Politics, partly about that experience a years, I don't even know, at some point in the past at DevOps Days DC and DevOps Days Seattle. And one of my points in that is, and I think people are realizing this more, is that politics and government affect you whether you're involved in them or not. So you might as well be involved in them.
Yeah, to that point, Nell, a phrase we like to say in Code for America is, no one is coming, it is up to us. You know, there's this tendency to look at how government uses technology and how it functions today and think, oh, well, someone ought to fix that. Someone's going to fix that eventually. You know, we know all these great things are possible. We know that it could be way better. And well, when is someone going to fix that? Well, no one's coming unless you go and be part of it.
Yeah, and Nell, you brought up something interesting as well, which is that certainly there are organizations where people make a career out of working in civic tech, and that's their full-time gig, and that's what they do. I've certainly seen an uptick in organizations where people can volunteer their professional skills at whatever amount of time they've got and pitch in and make a difference.
Yeah, a lot of folks talk about a tour of duty now. This notion that maybe a career in government isn't for you, but you can take your technical skills for 2 years, 4 years, have an impact, and then go back to whatever you like.
As I understand it, there are even organizations like 18F that hire specifically for that. Like when you join 18F, I think you come in for a 2-year tour of duty, and that's what you're signing up for when you join.
I believe it's similar with the U.S. Digital Service. It's a tour of duty.
So we've mentioned a couple of different organizations, Ragtag, Code for America, USDS, 18F. What other organizations are you involved with or know about that are doing this sort of civic hacking?
That kind of covers the spectrum, really. There's the federal teams, there's the national organizations. There's a lot of smaller groups that are focused in certain regions. But as far as what's relevant across the country to everyone, there's the federal teams, there's the volunteer teams, there's Code for All outside of the United States, and then there's actually digital services teams cropping up all over the place at the state and city level. So if you're in a major city, or chances are your state is either looking at or already building one of these teams, and they're recruiting DevOps people, user design people, service design people, content strategists, all the things you'd expect at a startup.
And I think sometimes you'll find in tech corporations, there'll be a team that is somehow focused on tech for social good. And sometimes, like in the case of Google.org years ago, it was building tech like crisis response and so on. Other organizations look for ways that their tech can be used for some sort of civic benefit. I'm thinking about the rideshare companies in the recent election that were offering discounted rides. So there are opportunities, even if you're working in a corporation, to find out what the corporation is doing in this area.
Yeah, and I think too that there's even an ad hoc element that has really mushroomed since 2016, because that's certainly how I got into it. As I said, I worked through this organization called Gigster, which gets gigs for freelancers. And after the election, we were all in our Slack where we all hang out and talk to each other. And someone said, "Hey, does anybody want to volunteer their time to do tech, hacking for good causes and good groups? Join me over here in the Slack channel I created, and let's figure out what we can do." And it went from there, and that's how I met Jill. And I just see that everywhere. That what happens is wherever people have little mini communities of any kind, whether it's at work or whatever it is, they are learning to organize themselves, especially in tech sectors, I think, because we all feel so empowered to do things, to get together and find out where they can donate their time to make something happen.
So Kirsten, what was your background before that?
So I have been in tech since 1997. and have seen it all. So I've done a lot of things. I was at a few different, a couple different startups out in Silicon Valley when I first started, and then I did my own startup and sold that, and then I went to work for a couple of years at Automatic, which is the company that runs WordPress.com, and that's the best work experience of my life, I always like to say. And that was what helped me, I think, get into the volunteering thing. I think it gave me a skill that's particularly useful to all kinds of efforts that might need someone with WordPress skills. There's a lot of WordPress being used out there, right, by campaigns and candidates and stuff. So I, at this point, have WordPress expertise. So that was really helpful to bring. I'm also working on my own startup again. That's all around this whole thing about empowering ad hoc groups of people to amplify themselves, right, and get their message out. So it's become a big focus for me.
An org I'd love to mention is Operation Code, which, as many of you know, is very close to my heart. I'm CTO of that org. We teach military veterans and their families software engineering skills. And in part, I remember I was talking to a veteran at one of our events, and he said, everyone thanks me for my service, but my service is not done. And he was seeking technical skills he knows better than anyone how badly the government needs technical help or how badly civic hacking is needed. And he wanted to continue his service to the nation of the US through that kind of technology and that civic hacking.
Yeah, and one way to volunteer and get involved that I don't hear come up that often as I'd like to hear is, find the public schools in your communities and go there and ask the teachers, who are the kids that are whizzes at computers that no one can teach, and get them involved in civic hacking projects. Sit down with them, look at organizations in your area or needs inside their own school, and build technology with them. Teach them while getting them into the civic hacking movement.
That's super cool. And I think, between Kirsten, Nell, and Chris, you just touched on two different areas around this. One, there's the group of people that have technical skills and want to get involved and help with sort of building things and so forth. And then there are also folks that maybe don't have technical skills, but do realize the power that technology can bring to them. So as an example, if you're helping build a WordPress site, the people that maybe are providing content on that WordPress site, they don't need to be technically skilled. They don't need to be software engineers, but you're giving them a platform from which to participate. So it's really making that tech and making the web accessible for new content creators. I think that's really exciting.
Well, and I love that you said that, because one of the things that we focus on a lot at Ragtag when we start to work with organizations is understanding where they're coming from, what they need, and make sure that whatever Ragtag's tech volunteers build is going to fit in with the way the organization gets their work done. What's really disheartening is when people pull together to do a project and they think they're going to parachute in, build some tech, and parachute right back on out. That just doesn't work, and in fact can be actively harmful to the organization you're trying to help, because suddenly they've got this new thing that they don't know what to deal with. So that's just vital, is building these kinds of relationships between anyone who wants to do civic hacking and the people who are going to benefit from it.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot and call that build with, not for, in the Code for America circles.
I love that. Build with, not for. I'm going to save that. That's fantastic.
And now in Operation Code, right, you're bringing in veterans and helping them get skilled up. So what's the typical, is there even a typical veteran that walks into Operation Code to look for help? Are they coming with technical skills, or they're coming to learn technical skills, or is it a mix of both?
I would say they're coming with technical skills, but they don't know it yet. They're coming with skills that are extremely relevant to the technical industry, but they don't quite understand that yet, because there's that disconnect between like a military resume and a civilian resume. So a lot of what we do when someone comes to us, they have the skills they need, or they have the ability to do them, but they don't have the confidence yet or the understanding of how to apply those. So I'd say someone comes in, we often match them up. We provide scholarships to coding boot camps. We lobby Congress to allow more GI Bill funds to be used for coding boot camps. And so the coding boot camps do a lot of the teaching. However, we are there as support every single step of the way. because I mean, a lot of us have been through the learning to code, and it's so hard. I mean, it's like a hockey stick. I mean, you can do something really fast, really quickly, which is awesome, but then everything else takes so much effort to learn. So we are there as a community of support, and we provide open source opportunities for our veterans to participate in, and we help them build that confidence and build the application of those skills that they learned in the military to the technology world.
That's super cool. And when it comes to things like that and building with, not for, what are some of the, is that helping drive any technology choices? I mean, we've heard WordPress already. Chris, you mentioned Habitat. Maybe you could share some of your experiences around which, if there are specific technologies that work really well with this idea, or even technologies that maybe you've avoided for various reasons.
So I have an example of this. In North Carolina, the North Carolina Board of Elections publishes their voter registration data free and frequently, which is great, and it's wonderful. I wish more states did that. They also publish data after elections about, for example, how many provisional ballots were filed and blah, blah, blah. And we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but there's an organization called the Southern Coalition for Social Justice that takes all of that data and tries to make sense of it to understand what's going on with voting patterns. They came to Ragtag early on and said, our Excel spreadsheets are driving us nuts. We can't deal with these pivot tables anymore. Can you build us some custom dashboards? And we took a look, and pretty rapidly, we realized that what they were looking at was basically a business intelligence problem. They didn't necessarily know the words business intelligence, but that's what they needed. What we wound up doing was lining them up with Tableau software. And there was a volunteer within Ragtag who knew how to use Tableau. He kind of set them up, got them going, and they were off to the races. So what I love about this example is that it was certainly using technology to accelerate the nonprofit. Building something for them would have been the wrong answer. But just knowing what's out there, how to apply it, how to make it useful to that group, and everyone went away happy.
And as someone who gets paid to do that kind of thing, I can tell you that the paid firm may not have made that same call. So, like we're actually, when you're doing it as a civic hacking thing, you're really actually trying to find the very best solution for the people you're working with, instead of what's the biggest thing we can build, which does happen.
And that's a really good segue to, if you're a veteran at shipping software solutions, one of the most powerful levers you have for having an impact is helping organizations and nonprofits make the decisions about what to buy, what to build. A lot of times, these organizations don't have technical capacity to look at a project and break it down into logical components and make the right call for each piece. And so what they do is just put out a blank check to vendors to say, hey, come propose a solution. And it's invariably something that, locks them in to a big pile of stuff they don't need. And governments they struggle, and there's just not enough of us out there that want to work in government. And so in Philly, what we did was we showed up to our local government officials time and time again for years and years and years and said, look, this is a problem. The way you buy software and the way you plan software doesn't work. We want to help. We don't want to throw eggs. There's a lot of technical know-how in our city that would be happy to show up for an hour a month, an hour a week even, and help you talk through these things. And that didn't resonate with the first couple people we pitched it to, but after a couple of years, eventually people saw our fortune telling come true time and time again, and then they came to us and built an advisory council that gets to sit down and brings together folks from private sector and public sector to talk about the strategies, how to break things down. And that talent's needed sorely at all levels of government and nonprofits. And if you show up and are constructive and say, I can help you, not change how you do things, but just help you think about how to break things apart logically and think about where you buy things and where you build things, where you use open source, where you don't, it takes a couple hours and it has a huge impact.
So a question from me then, and I think this applies to both, all the orgs we're talking about here. It seems like collaboration with both the key stakeholders and the engineers who are building it, and everything needs to happen. What kind of tools do you use, and what kind of processes to facilitate that communication and collaboration?
I'm hesitating because a lot of the projects we do are they're not years-long projects. They might be months-long projects. So there isn't some sort of process where, that we don't make Gantt charts. We don't do any of those things. We use a lot of Google Docs. It's nice because you can share them outside your organization. Internally, Ragtag lives and dies in its Slack. And that's where we organize people onto projects. That's where we do all of the project management. Long-term document storage we put in Discourse because it's a little easier to follow that sort of thing in Discourse. But beyond that, again, it comes down to meeting the organizations where they are. So most people can deal with Google Docs and email, so we do a lot with Google Docs and email.
I'm curious if when you're working with governments, do they have limitations on being able to work with, say, Google-based products and things? Because I haven't done like directly working to help with the government.
Some do. That's one of the battles that's been more easily won as of late. But it is spot on that there isn't any one tool or practice. You really have to meet people where they are, start with what they're doing now, and then gradually try to help them adopt new tools and processes.
Something I've found is you have to let go of being right. That doesn't mean you have to let go of doing what's right, but you have to let go of being right. My tool, this tool that we use outside of government is superior, so the government should use this. That may not meet their needs, particularly when they're dealing with restricted information. So you have to meet people where they are and meet them where their needs are, rather than trying to bring them to where you are.
Yeah, that's spot on. Everyone's got their favorite tool, and I've learned to not start those fights when we don't need to. But we do kind of have a crisis of tools in the civic hacking community right now, because a lot of the tools out there that the technology industry is built on are oriented around this notion of global scale or people's ambitions of eventual global scale, and it creates an economics and a complexity that just isn't appropriate for making a budget visualization that's online for the next 10 years and can be spun back up 5 years from now when there's a new budget set of PDFs put out. The economics are just very different, and Habitat gives me a lot of hope as something that lets us go in that direction of building for both the global scale and the human local scale.
I'm a member of the Habitat core team, so that is awesome to hear.
So how is Habitat enabling that for you, Chris?
Well, it brings a couple things. One, the ability of Habitat to defer topology decisions so that you can package an application and decide later, do I need to deploy it across 100 machines or do I need to run 100 apps on one virtual machine? That's very important, I think. And also the stability over time it gives you. A lot of times what we see, like an example of that budget visualization, if someone builds that with a Vagrant file so that it needs a whole virtual machine running, well, someone's going to be looking at that virtual machine every month, trying to cut their budget and shut it down. And then 5 years from now, when the new budget comes out and everyone's looking at following the links to the old budget and seeing the story, and it's gone because someone wanted to stop paying $10 a month to run that thing, then that makes everyone start over. That's an impediment to us building on what we've done already and moving forward continuously rather than just doing the same things over and over again. And another big part of that is, let's say I find the source code for that tool that was built 5 years ago. Well, if I don't have Ubuntu 12 anymore, none of that stuff's going to run. And I try to run it on my new machine and nothing works because all the dependencies have changed. And that cyclical nature of depending on upstream packages of base distributions just doesn't work in this long scale of light development. That model's fine when you have a huge team working on one thing constantly and they can upgrade every time there's a new thing happening. But one of my hopes for Habitat, and we haven't seen this play out over 5 years yet, but one of my hopes for Habitat is, it forces you to identify your dependencies up front so that if something works now, I'm guaranteed it can work again 5 years from now. And the next person to work on this isn't going to have to start with rebuilding the whole thing to work on a new base distribution.
That's super cool. So what are some of the things that have really surprised you as you've been participating in this space around civic hacking and civic tech? What are things that have surprised you both, maybe surprised in a delighted way and maybe surprised you in a way that you're pretty fearful?
I'm surprised in a delighted way at how many people are inspired to help. Whenever we see new people come into the Ragtag Slack, it makes my day. So that's a good surprise. As far as I don't know if it's necessarily surprising, but as far as something that takes up a lot of my time, it's thinking about, well, when you run volunteer-based projects, how to think about staffing for those projects, because it's very different from running them in the corporate world, where in the corporate world, when someone leaves a project, that's kind of a major event, right? They've resigned or they've transferred or whatever. On a volunteer project, it's just really common that people's time becomes unpredictable one week to the next. And figuring out how to plan around that has been both time consuming, but also really rewarding.
That's super interesting, and I'd love to just pull on that thread for a second, because I think that even in the corporate world, right, people disappear all the time. Maybe there's less of an expectation that that's going to happen, but I don't know. In my experience, life happens. Like, people get sick, people go on vacation, and so maybe the orgs and the work that you're doing is even more resilient to that by nature of the fact that you expect it going in. And maybe that can help us inform some of the choices that we make on the commercial side about how do we treat our teams, how do we work together with our teams.
You know, it could be. I think it's a continuum. When we do ragtag projects, often we overstaff everything, which in a corporation you probably don't have the luxury of doing. And sometimes add people to projects and specifically tell them they're the understudy. You know, your role is to understand how this code works, you know, do the code reviews and all that. We're not actually asking you to write any code right now, unless, you know, the leading lady breaks her ankle and suddenly, Peggy Sawyer, you're a star. And so we build that in certain of our projects.
You know, we're loving that theater reference.
Yeah, I figured you
Absolutely.
were.
We totally are.
Yeah. What else? What other surprises have you come across?
I can jump in next if no one else is ready. The biggest surprise for me that is pleasant but also has a downside is how easy it is to make change in government and organizations when you just show up relentlessly. I've really come to realize, and I've heard this before, that government is the sum of people who show up. And so it's been really, you know, you have to see, you show up once, nothing happens, it's easy to get discouraged. But when you show up over and over again for years, things happen, things change, and it's really rewarding to see. But the corollary to that is that government is the sum of people who show up, and most people show up where their paycheck takes them. And if the benefits of technology are channeled primarily towards where there are paychecks, we're not going to get the future that I think a lot of us want to see, that's more equitable and that minimizes suffering and maximizes human potential. And so it's not going to happen unless people show up outside of their paychecks and really put their skills where their values are.
Something that I've found that's actually a surprising similarity between, I'd say the civic hacking and then corporate work. So one thing I've found, I've worked a few elections now with various campaigns. The hardest thing is when someone comes in as a volunteer for the first time and that whatever they're volunteering for doesn't win. It's hard to experience that for the first time, but that is the nature of the work. You're not always going to be successful no matter how much work you put into it, but you can build on what you learned from that. I don't even want to call it a failure, but from that, non-win. I mean, in politics, it's win or lose for many things. You can build on that and you can carry it forward. The same thing is true in the corporate world. I mean, not every project is going to be successful, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing that project for what you learned on it and how you can apply it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. It's really about creating a steady current, not one win here and there.
Yeah, and I'll put in a heartfelt plea for project retros, especially in the campaign world, where as soon as election day's over, you don't pull up stakes and go home. That's when it's time to think about what worked, what didn't, what surprised us, and why. If I look a little tired today, it's because we've kind of been doing that for the last week and a half. But you have to do that. You have to figure out how to, if things are going to go a little quiet for the next couple of months because it's not quite an election cycle, figure out how to put them away nicely so that you're not unwrapping a box in a year and a half and going, what on earth is this?
I'm curious though, because I'm sort of the contingent, the non-leadership contingent on the discussion today. I'm, the person who walked in one day to Ragtag to volunteer and had no idea what to expect. And this idea of
Wait, you think the leaders know what to expect when we walk?
No.
Okay.
Fair point. Fair point. Yeah. But the idea that, for someone's first time volunteering experience to end up being somehow a loss, like assuming it's a campaign or something, is a really interesting concept to me. And it's something I'm sort of working on tangentially anyway. And I'm curious what you think about or what you do, any of you do around setting people up for that as they come in as new first-time volunteers, to kind of set their expectations up right, to understand what they're going to get out of it and how to appreciate it, even if they don't get the end outcome that everybody's going for.
We really haven't figured that out yet. We try to say it over and over again, but we still see 90% of the people that show up get discouraged by their first thing not panning out and bouncing off. It's sad.
Go ahead. Oh, it helps to, as much as you can, set the expectations at the beginning. And then, the hardest thing on election day, because so much of our attention and it is taken up, and emotional energy is taken up by the election itself, being ready to be a community of support, whatever way the election goes. Because there, as we've learned in 2016, there's really no way of knowing before election day how the votes are going to fall. And there's a lot of and also emphasizing to people, there are a lot of things out of your control, but you can control what you can. You can make the best effort you possibly can, and let's be here as a community to support each other, no matter which way the election goes.
That's super cool. So if I want to get started with civic hacking, how do I get started with Ragtag or with Code for America or with Operation Code? What are some of the things that I need to do? How do I help?
So Ragtag's pretty easy. Ragtag.org/join is where volunteers sign up. We'll ask you a couple of questions. What's your superpower? That'll help us, once you're in the community, figure out the best way to direct you.
There's so many ways to get involved. It's hard to name just one. One way is to connect with a local brigade in your community. If your community has one, they'll be called things like Code for Philly or Open Seattle. If you go to brigade.codeforamerica.org, there's a map of all the registered brigades in the U.S., and you can find the contact information for one of them. Other ways to engage, though, the thing I mentioned before, just show up to an organization in your community, a public school, the government, a nonprofit, and see how you can help, see where they're wanting for technology, where it's impeding the work they're already doing on the ground. And then there's the big national open source projects. One initiative I'm trying to push forward and I'm part of right now is something called the Civic Cloud, where we're trying to help build a set of technologies and practices for hosting things that stay online for a long time but don't really get a lot of traffic.
I saw a cool project earlier this week at a conference called the Aspiration Tech Dev Summit, where the team is creating software that will scrape local government sites to make it very easy for citizens to know when public meetings are happening. When is the Board of Elections meeting? When is the Department of Public Works meeting? Any of these public meetings, called cityscrapers.org. And I thought that was a very, very cool project. They started in Chicago and they're expanding now. So look around. Do a Google search and see who's doing this kind of thing.
Sorry to pop back in. I want to throw one more URL out there. So in addition to brigade.codeforamerica.org, where you can find a local group, we also have discourse.codeforamerica.org, where we talk about some of the projects that are going on across the country. And that's a great place to pop up and say hi or find a project or contribute to a conversation. So both of those are great places to check out and plug in.
That's awesome. And we'll make sure that we get all of those URLs into our show notes so you can find them and actually click on them at foodfightshow.org.
For Operation Code, head on over to operationcode.org/join. I will ask for some volunteer information just about what what technologies you're interested in or have worked in. And you don't have to be a technologist to help with Operation Code. But then you will receive an invite to our Slack channel. We do manually send those out, so expect it within a day or so. And then you'll join the Slack where all the magic happens.
I'll throw in one. This is a group that I got involved with through Ragtag. They're called Resistance School, and they're at resistanceschool.com. And I think this is the kind of thing that can really help people get engaged, because it's a bunch of training videos by people who have long careers and experience in civic organizing and doing things. You can go on and you can learn, well, what's it like to go door to door and register people to vote, and how do I do that, or how do I canvass, and all kinds of skills, so that by the time they show up to volunteer somewhere, they feel stronger in what they're going to do and have a better, like we were talking about, vision of what it's going to be like. And it's free.
That's cool. It also brings up another, I think, another avenue for helping out, right? To help with civic tech or civic hacking, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to write code. Maybe you could do video production. Maybe you know how to write docs. Maybe you know how to whatever. Like, there's so many different ways that you can participate in this.
I think that's really important, because in the civic tech that I've done, I feel like that's where we're always hurting for help, is like writers, editors. We could really use editors and proofreaders.
One of the superpowers we ask about at Ragtag is explaining things to people, because so much of it, just going back to what I talked about before, where you might not need to build something to help the organization you're trying to help. You will certainly need to explain to them what it is that you're recommending, and hear them for whether they think it's going to meet their needs or not, and then help them get up and running.
Yeah, those are really essential points to make. One of our values in Code for America is that empathy is our operating system. So that's really the root of everything we do, is empathy. And if you can empathize, if you can sit down with someone on either side of the front desk at a government office, the user of services or the staff member trying to provide them, and understand their problems, understand their needs, like, that's the key of it. If you imagine a software product team that only had coders, like, that's obviously a disaster. You need a full plethora of skills to really make an impact with that. And that's really been one of the most unfortunate things, is that Code for America is called Code for America and Code for Philly is called Code for Philly. It causes a lot of people to self-select out and say, oh, I'm not a coder, that's not for me. But really, it's not about writing code for America, it's about putting code to work for America, and that takes everyone. And that's why we see a lot of local groups switch to the open nomenclature, like Open Miami and Open Seattle.
That's really cool. I guess the one final thing that I'd love to just hear from each of you is, actually, Jill, you mentioned this earlier about, like, the state of North Carolina releasing all of their voter registration data. It seems to me like there is just so much data that's available that civic organizations, government organizations are making available. What are you doing with that data? What big data tools are you using or playing with? And then maybe also, are you using that data as a way to help yourself learn more about how to interact with big data, machine learning, things along those lines?
So civic tech is always and absolutely is a great way to learn whatever you want to learn. If you have something you want to practice, you need to work with other people on real problems, and there's few places you can do that and build a portfolio than civic tech. So whatever you're learning, it's a great place to do it. We see people use all sorts of tools. To name specifics, when it comes to, we've really won the open data fight. Open data is generally accepted now as good. We're swimming in data. Now it's, what do we do with it? How do we operationalize it? How do we make it useful to people? And I mentioned, I told a story before about budget visualization. That's a big piece, and something I hope Habitat can play a part in. The length of time we're talking about in public data is cycles of years and 5 years and 10 years. So we need software and tools that can stay out there until someone builds on it again. D3 is a big thing. We need people learning D3, deploying D3 to help turn data into stories. We need journalists to come in and help that happen, figure out what the story is to tell.
I'd love to give a shout out to an organization called DataKind at datakind.org, which is data scientists volunteering their skills for good. They'll work with organizations that need data science in some way or another. and the volunteers in DataKind will figure out how to turn data into information.
I heard that point, turn data into information. It's so key to find meaning in the data that we are generating and collecting now. Well, I'm going to briefly ask each of the panelists if you could briefly tell me what's one of your favorite stories from working in public hacking or civic hacking. For me, one of the applications I worked on as part of Dev Progress was called Hillary B&B. It was a site for, and Jill's nodding her head because I think she knows where I'm going with this, but it was a site that was forked from Bernie B&B for helping match campaign volunteers with places to stay if they were volunteering away from home. In January of 2017, I was recovering from surgery. I was not in a good place. And then I saw on GitHub that Hillary B&B had been forked by the Women's March on Washington and become March B&B. And so it was used to coordinate that, and then it's also being used by other campaigns, and it's wonderful to see it live on. Jill, do you want to go into that?
Sure. Just to say that, yes, the project still exists. The project is still going on. We call it localhost now, which sounded like this amazing idea. It turns out to be a real pain in the neck when you're working on a dev version of it, because you've got the localhost version of localhost. So, great pun, not so great for the developers. But yeah, I love that you chose that example.
Yeah, watching your work live on and be built on is one of the greatest thrills in the world. What about our panel? What are some of your favorite stories from your time in civic tech?
One story for me, and it's hard to pick. This is one of a countless stories where we've seen folks come to the brigade in Philly and use it as a leap point to get into a new career they've been dreaming about. But in one case, we had a fellow show up. He described himself as a recovering attorney that was trying to get into technology. And he liked biking, and we just had him think, well, how could you help improve biking in Philly by building an app? So his idea was to build an app that would help commuters record their routes and report them to someone. And so he wasn't a coder. He had no idea how to code yet. He was interested in technology. So he used the tools he had available to him as a recovering attorney. And he went and talked to organizations. He talked to a number of people, the Bicycle Coalition. He talked to the Regional Planning Commission, and he figured out what they really had a need for. And then he did research. He went on Google and looked for past work in the space and found projects in Atlanta and a couple other places that had either forked that or did their own. So there's piles of code out there already kind of doing this. And then from there, with an organizational partner in place who was saying what they needed, and here's how we're going to roll this out if we had it. He had proof points from past projects and piles of code. From there, it was easy to recruit developers to come work on it, and they cleaned it up, they built it, they launched it, they collected a lot of data, they won awards for it. Cities all over the world forked it and spun out their own copies of it. So I love that story because it really highlights that a successful project doesn't start with coders. It starts with a validated need. It starts with research and seeing what's been done already, and then building on top of what's been done already with people that are ready to use the thing you're going to build. And anyone can do it.
I'll go. So one of the many side benefits to volunteering, of course, is the people you get to meet. And and the friends you make, like if you really open yourself up to making new friends as part of the experience. And so when I was as I've been working with Resistance School, of course, we're always hanging out on Slack, and we have a weekly meeting and all that kind of thing. And we had a new woman who had joined, and she said, "Oh, guys, I'm for my job, I'm putting together a pitch. I want to give a speech. I want to give a talk at this at a convention in Germany, right, in Berlin. So I've got to go. I've got to write on it." So I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm this old horse that's done many, pitch proposals and presentations in my day, and as a startup entrepreneur and all that stuff. So I said to her, "Hey, let me know if I can help you out with that. I'd love to help you if you want any help." And she said, and I said, what's you talking to be about? And she said, oh, well, stopping asteroids that are headed toward the planet that might destroy the planet. It turns out she's an astrophysicist at MIT. I was like, oh, I probably can't help you with that, bitch. So you get to meet a lot of really super cool, interesting people. There's another one. There was at Ragtag, there was a NASA scientist, and being someone who's obsessed with space and the space program, because I grew up when we landed on the moon. I was a little kid when we first landed on the moon. Like, that's just so exciting for me to be 1 degree of separation from these fascinating, interesting people that I would never otherwise meet.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So I'd like to, I don't have a story to share with Civic Hacking, but I've been kind of listening to this conversation and thinking about the Food Fight Show itself. This is a podcast that's about DevOps. So how does Civic Hacking and DevOps, how do they relate to one another? And I jotted down a couple of quick notes. There are things that happen in DevOps that we bring into our practice of DevOps that I think happen, from what I understand through this episode, happen every day or frequently within the space of civic tech or civic hacking. There's project retros, there's pair programming, there's planning for people's time to be scarce, there's intentional technology choices, a focus on collaboration, thinking about how do you onboard new people, getting discouraged. That happens all the time in DevOps. Of course, it happens in civic hacking as well. And then there was another, I forget exactly who it was that said this, but one of you mentioned, hey, I'm not a coder. You know what? We hear that in DevOps all the time also. And you don't have to be a coder to participate in the DevOps process. And certainly there are folks within that are coders. They just don't even recognize that skill within themselves. And I feel like civic hacking is a way that can help you discover that, just the same way that you can in DevOps. But I think at the end of the day, the way that the two really relate and are the same is that the people that show up to do the work are passionate about what they're doing. You don't show up and civic hack because you don't care. You show up because you do care. And I would argue that that is one of the founding principles of the DevOps movement as well. You have to care about the work that you're doing. You have to care about for whom you're doing that work and how they're going to use the tools, the technologies that we're building. So I think this has been a super awesome episode. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming on. And before we wrap up, of course, I want to get us to the picks. So the picks is the point in our episode where each panelist can share something with our audience. It can be related to what we've been talking about in this past hour, or it can be completely not related to that. Either way is totally fine. And also, I'll just ask that as we come to you to do your pick, if you could just let us know, how can we get in touch with you individually? Maybe it's your Twitter handle, an email address. Probably don't want to share your phone number, but I'm not going to stop you. It's up to you. Nell, why don't we go to you first for picks?
Sure. The pick I'm going to do is the Nintendo Switch. I was recently looking, so speaking of civic work, my wife is in her 3rd year of law school. She's becoming an immigration attorney. And I needed something that I could play games on to just rest my mind a little bit at the end of the day. But she likes to study in her living room, so I couldn't have something on the TV. So the Switch is nice because I can play it in my hands or on the TV. And it was also fantastic when I had a 9-hour flight to London just a few weeks ago to speak at the Chef Community Summit. So Nintendo Switch is my pick. A lot of you probably already know how to contact me, but just in case you don't, at Nell Shamrell on Twitter is probably the best way to contact me.
Awesome. Kirsten, let's go to you next.
Okay, this was totally daunting to me because I feel like I have a million and I also have nothing. But I came up with a book called The Year Without Pants. And it's by a guy named Scott Birkin. And it's about his year. He's a journalist, but he spent a year actually working as an employee at Automatic, which is the place I mentioned earlier. That's my favorite place I ever worked. And I think what's really great for everybody who might be in this universe about it is that it's all about the fact that Automatic is a completely and totally remote organization. They don't have a headquarters. They don't have an office. Everyone works from home. And they were one of the earliest companies to do that and kind of pioneer that. And they're really good at it. They're really, really good at it. And so a lot of us, and a lot of volunteer, especially tech volunteer work, ends up being a remote exercise, right? And so it's a neat insight and has a lot of ideas about how to do that really well.
That's awesome. As someone who's spent many, many years working for distributed companies and spending a lot of time working out of my home, that sounds like a great thing to read for sure.
I definitely read that before I worked remote for the first time.
You did.
Awesome. And Kirsten, how can folks find you online?
Oh, right. I forgot to say that. The best place is Twitter. And I have, for some reason, all my internet things are weird. So I'll just spell this. It's M like Mary, S like Sally, P like Peter, S like Sally, E, U, D like dog, O, L like Larry, U, S like Sally. And the way you say that is even more ridiculous. Ms. Pseudolus. I'm sorry, but I picked it back in 2011 and I'm stuck with it.
I don't know which is more awesome, though, the hearing you pronounce it or the epic eye roll that went along with you pronouncing it.
It's so embarrassing. Those choices you made, like back when you joined Twitter and you didn't even know what it was.
It's awesome. Awesome. Jill, let's go to you next.
Sure. We had one recommendation for a book. I'm gonna say my pick is book clubs. You know, getting out there in real life over coffee with people to talk about books. It's just amazing. My book club meets tomorrow, so I'm shouting out to them. And yeah, my pick is book clubs. And also on Twitter, I'm Jill Hutchetow. I'm going to rely on the fine folks in this podcast to write it out there because Hutchetow can be a little challenging to spell.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to include a link. Can I put you on the spot? Book club's meeting tomorrow. What's the book you're discussing?
So it's Leviathan Wakes, I think. So when you read books on Kindle, you never know what they're called because you don't see the book cover. But it's 577 pages of hard sci-fi, and I'm going to see what my book club thinks.
That's part of The Expanse, isn't it?
Yes, it's part of
Awesome.
Super cool. All right, Chris, let's go to you.
Well, I'm hesitant to make this pick because I don't think it's a surprise to any folks on here, but anyone that has to listen to me day to day is probably sick of hearing about this. So I got to stay true to myself. You know, I think it's vital for communities and organizations to build software with open cores that they can hack on and run on any machines they want or have. So I got to say Habitat.
That's awesome. Awesome. And where can we find you online, Chris?
Well, I also picked my online handle when I was about 14. So you can find me on Twitter under The Mighty Chris.
I like it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So for me, I have one pick today also, and unintentionally, I'm just going to stick with the theme, and it's going to be a book. And I happen to have the book here. It is The Business Value of Developer Relations, written by Mary Thangvall. It's all about community advocacy, specifically in the tech world, and what is like how and why technical communities are key to your success. So if you're an organization that's building a technology product and wants to build a community around that product or around that project, I think I highly recommend that you pick up this book and read through it. There's lots of great stuff like how do you measure the success of your community, things like that. Also, as a preview, we're going to have Mary on soon on the show to talk about the book. So that might even be our very next episode.
I call it the avocado book. It says avocados on the smiley avocados on the cover.
Indeed, we've taken on developer avocados as our sort of meme or our handle for all of the developer advocates that are out there. And maybe Mary will give us the insight and the backstory on why avocados are the fruit of choice. All right, well, you can find me online. I'm at Nathan Harvey, but my dad misspelled my name, so it's NathenHarvey. Because he knew, you know, one day I was going to need a unique Twitter handle, and so success. And with that, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us, and thank you for listening. I hope that this has inspired you to think about how can you take the talents that you have, and yes, those talents are worthwhile. How can you take those talents out into the world and use them for good? Help out, volunteer some of your time and talents. get involved with civic hacking. And until next time, keep it hot.